This is the gaming channel. It's been a while since we've had a Star Wars game like Squadrons. Star Wars Squadrons was revealed out of the blue on the 15th of June last year. Less than a year before, we'd already had a Star Wars game that was still relatively recent at the time, Jedi Fallen Order. Notably, the reveal trailer for Squadrons was released a mere 3.5 months before the game's release. I could be wrong, but I think that no one knew the game was coming. I definitely didn't. Anyway, the trailers for the game were interesting and I was looking forward to playing it. Now I will get down to reviewing Star Wars Squadrons. I did hope that you could play the game in third person as well as first person. Unfortunately for me, the game can only be played in first person. It's different for sure, and it's been a while since there's been a solely first person Star Wars space combat game when it comes to more well known space combat games in the franchise that only consist of space combat. When piloting your starfighter, there are a fair few gameplay elements and there are visual displays of these in the cockpit of your fighter. In this sense, having to utilise numerous aspects of your fighter to improve its effectiveness in different scenarios is more realistic, and it makes you think that fighter pilots for the Rebel Alliance and the Empire must have to use all the different controls and settings in their cockpits when they fly their fighters. As a result of the numerous gameplay features and abilities each fighter has, the gameplay is made more challenging and somewhat captivating, rather than simplistic. I like this, but I can also find it annoying due to the fact there are more gameplay elements to remember, and not having to think about more complex gameplay is something I would additionally welcome in a game like this. Therefore, you could say I'm divided when concerning the more complex gameplay. Let's talk about the story now. Yes, the game has a story, and it proved to be longer and take longer to complete than I thought. Even though there are 14 missions, there are technically 16 because there is a Prologue 1 and a Prologue 2, which are basically missions as well. When you think about it, especially in a game like this, that's quite a few missions, which means that the campaign is not as short as you might think, depending on how good you are at space combat games. Something that was a pleasant surprise in the story was having two sorts of hub areas, I suppose, one for the Rebels and the other for the Imperials. This adds to the campaign and means you aren't just piloting a fighter for the entire story. Furthermore, you can talk to numerous characters in both hub areas, usually the same ones who you are with throughout the story. Apart from new characters, there are some familiar ones who show up, such as Hera Syndulla from Star Wars Rebels, Wedge Antilles from the original trilogy, Star Wars Rebels and The Rise of Skywalker, Rey Sloane from numerous pieces of Star Wars media, and Leia Organa herself. Moving back to the hub areas, I like how you can move the camera 360 degrees left and right. You can move the camera up and down too. Additionally, while talking to characters, you can still move the camera. The characters are perhaps one of the more interesting parts of the story, as you can have numerous interesting and thought-provoking conversations with them, including finding out about their views and lives. Being with the characters on both sides is interesting, as you get to see how they all interact with each other and how your squadron interacts with each other, giving you an idea of the relationship both squadrons have. Switching between the Empire and the Rebels throughout the story, for certain missions, is good, and you get the opportunity to pilot a variety of different starfighters in both factions. Before you start the story, you have to create your own character, which brings in a customization aspect. You can even customize the starfighters. While you aren't able to customize them cosmetically, you can change the parts needed for them, such as the weapons and so on, a useful and helpful aspect in gameplay. Personally, I feel that the story itself is average. Aspects of it are interesting, but after playing through a few missions it soon gets boring and the missions themselves are mostly lackluster. I wasn't surprised that the story proved to be nothing special due to the fact that Squadrons is not a single player story focused game, with more of the focus being on the multiplayer side. Even though I didn't really enjoy the story and its plot, for a game which is not a single player story focused one, the campaign doesn't seem rushed and you can tell a lot of work has been put into it, which I appreciate. One of the shining factors of this game are the visuals. Graphically, Squadrons is beautiful, and the planets and locations in space are stunning to look at. In addition, the cockpits look great with their detail and lighting, especially the X-Wing, as does the lighting of the planets and areas of space you find yourself in. The story cutscenes are also visually impressive and attractive to watch. One example of the attention to detail is when cracks form on your ship's cockpit windows when it gets damaged. This adds to the realism and is an aesthetic feature you want to see, which makes the first-person experience of piloting a starfighter all the more immersive. Playing this game in VR must be quite the experience, and what's even more impressive is that you can play the whole game in virtual reality. When it comes to the sound and sound design, this game also fails to disappoint. The iconic sound effects you expect to hear are in this game, whether it be the roar of a TIE fighter's engine or the sound of quick-fire blasts from an X-Wing. Aside from the many familiar sound effects you will hear in the game, there are new and or perhaps less familiar ones which are pleasing to hear too. Much of the soundtrack in the story is familiar as well, including music from the Skywalker saga, and I'm pretty sure I heard music from the newer Battlefront games. Hearing these soundtracks, more so the Skywalker Saga ones in my opinion, is always good to hear in a Star Wars game. Overall, I would say that Star Wars Squadrons is not a game I will play a lot in the future, maybe from time to time for a bit of fun. Star Wars space combat games usually appeal to me less, so I don't tend to play them as much. The same goes for the space combat segments in Star Wars games that aren't simply space combat games. Maybe if there was a third person mode I would play the game more, but the fact it is only first person is different compared to more recent space combat in Star Wars games, and the fact it is different, as it is something we haven't seen in a big Star Wars space combat game, is a nice welcome change. The gameplay can be fun, but for me the fun wouldn't last long, and I have to admit that I wanted to get the story done so I could move on to the next game on my channel. I don't imagine that this is ever a game I would not be able to stop playing, rather one I would play for shorter periods. While the game performs in some areas, it doesn't do that as much in others. Due to my tastes, Squadrons is not one of my favourite Star Wars games, but it is definitely not bad, and for a cheaper, smaller Star Wars game, it's impressive, and may surprise you if you aren't expecting much from it. I hope you enjoyed this review. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, because I'll be working on other reviews for the other games I've played on the channel. Look out for other gaming content, and even the odd bit of content which isn't related to gaming. That is all.